Brother Hello! Welcome to lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Hoops Peters, and now part of the VSiN family of podcasts. We've got an excellent podcast for you. We're going to be joined in segment number 2 by one of our good friends, Tristan Freeman, who does such amazing work over at Bustin' Brackets all 12 months out of the year, taking a look at this great sport that we all know and love of college basketball. And I want to place a little bit of an emphasis here today on some of these, shall we say, bottom feeder teams from this past season that I feel like have made some great offseason moves. The ACC is certainly one of them. We've seen Boston College spend. He's out there in the city of Pittsburgh, and Pittsburgh has been one of the most active teams in the transfer portal. We're going to be touching upon that, what we've seen in terms of the Big 12 teams making some nice coaching hires, the teams that did like Cincinnati, Kansas State, what have you, and obviously the Big East with Providence. They have been very prominent as well. And then we did see the transfer portal close on very, very late Tuesday, super duper early Wednesday, and we'll get his thoughts on some of these teams that have not signed a lot of guys as of right now. As I'm doing this, LSU's roster is Mohamed Diabate and Mohamed Diabate. So that's been interesting to say the least, and you saw so many guys enter into the transfer portal that are just flat out of eligibility. I covered that on the podcast the last few days. We'll chat with him about if these teams like LSU, Kentucky are just holding up for some of these guys, or if it's just been a little bit of failure for them here in the transfer portal process in general. Then in the final segment, I'm going to get you guys a recap of the news and notes we saw in college basketball on Wednesday. If you have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you for this podcast, you do have one of two ways we offer those in. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at gunit_81. Keep in mind there's the name does not matter, so as per usual, please send these into the timeline. And the other way is find an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it's very much appreciated. From there, you're able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review. Really did not get any Twitter/X questions. Something else I'm going to be covering a little bit more on the podcast here in the coming days and the coming weeks are some of these NBA draft decisions. Like you did see Isaiah Evans declare for the NBA draft on Wednesday. You saw a few returnees as well, which you'd love to see. And for Duke, Patrick Ngongba coming back, that really takes away a lot of the sting that you've got with that decision. And Caleb Foster, he did announce as well on Wednesday that he's going to be coming back, and I really do think that Duke has had themselves a really nice offseason. Signed John Blackwell a little bit earlier on during the week, but you do have some of these teams like in Arkansas with Malik Arrington that they've got their name in the draft, but they are unsure of whether or not they are going to be staying in the draft. They're going to be going through the process. These are going to be big decisions. Could that lead to another, shall we say, wave in the transfer portal? Is it going to be a case where these teams are going to be sort of left out in the dark? Tonde Yusufu is another one of those guys, which he already declared for the NBA draft, but he entered in the transfer portal as well. Lots to take a look at there, so I'll be tackling that in the coming weeks. And here on the podcast today, we're going to be talking a lot of ACC, a lot of these teams that they're trying to go from the bottom and they're trying to rise up right away. And we'll chat about that on the flip side here with Tristan Freeman of Bustin' Brackets right here on Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Peterson, now a part of the VSiN Family Podcast. Side edge this college basketball season? Well, VSiN experts use CBB Analytics, the most comprehensive college basketball analytics platform in the world. See injury impact, on and off data, clutch time performance metrics, first versus second half splits, and so much more. Utilize the promo code of VSiN, that is VSIN, to get $30 off and find your betting edge over at cbbanalytics.com. That is cbbanalytics, all one word.com. For anyone that is new to VSiN, well, I wish you a friendly hello. This is an attention to anyone that is new to VSiN because you're able to get some free stuff with our daily newsletter. It's a great way to catch up on everything that's happening in the sports betting world. It's delivered straight to your inbox every single morning. VSiN's newsletter offers picks, data, strategies for the day's betting menu, and so much more. Sign up for free today over at VSiN.com/newsletter. That's VSIN.com/newsletter, and start receiving your free newsletter tomorrow morning. That is VSIN.com/newsletter. Stay ahead of the game and bet smarter with VSiN. And we're back here in lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Hoops Peterson, now part of the VSiN family of podcasts. And it's always a pleasure to be joined by this man as we've got Tristan Freeman aboard. He does such great work over at Bustin' Brackets, doing an amazing job looking at the sport of college basketball all 12 months out of the year. Additionally, I know that he's doing some work over at Sleepers Media, Field of 68, so much more. This man, he does such a great job all 12 months of the year locking in on this great sport. And you're able to follow him on the old Twitter/X at Hoopsnut351 altogether. And Tristan, it's always a pleasure, my friend. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Greg. Appreciate it.
I appreciate you, Tristan. And Tristan, I know that you're out there in ACC country and you do quite a good job taking a look at all those Pittsburgh teams. And how about if we start there? Because with the Pittsburgh Panthers, they've had a lot of signings here in the offseason. I've almost called them like the ACC Avengers because they've picked up so many guys within the conference. But just what have you made out of this offseason for them with them deciding to give Jeff Capel another year and really going in hard on the transfer portal thus far?
Yeah, it wasn't too much of a surprise. That was a complete roster overhaul after, just going 5-13 in league play. You mentioned the ACC guys there. They had four guys, including a pair of teammates in Beta Dongo and Nate George, both who were at Georgia Tech at one point. They're both going to be penciled in as starters, and they're proven guys. And I think, looking at the overall roster, you have, quite a few players with high major experience, including Jalil Bethea and Jonathan Powell. And I think Pitt wanted to have guys they knew could play in the ACC to have, sort of a higher floor, but also go after guys like Alam Sumler from Charleston Southern, who averaged 19 a game, and or Monty Mighty, who averaged a double-double at the CAA level. So I think, from a depth perspective, they have guys that should be able to produce. But, it'll be interesting to see outside of Beta Dongo who can be an all-league guy, because you're going to have multiple all-league candidates if you want to be a tournament team and make a run up in the ACC. And the seat's definitely hot for Jeff Capel coming in next season.
Yeah, I was quite surprised that Jeff Capel was able to maintain his job. So we'll see what he's going to be able to do moving forward. But certainly they have been spending. And just what have you made in general out of the, I'm going to call it bottom ACC teams, really going in hard this offseason? Because for Pittsburgh, they have invested a lot of resources. We know that with Syracuse, they hire on Jerry McNamara. And I love what Boston College has done here in the offseason. Breaking in Luke Murray, certainly they're probably not going to be like some sort of a 25 plus one team or anything like that, but all of a sudden they look respectable on paper. It really feels like a lot of these bottom ACC teams have looked themselves in the mirror and have gotten really serious about basketball here in the offseason.
I think a lot of the ACC teams targeted guys they knew were gettable. So instead of, trying to be in the sweepstakes for, top transfers that they knew ultimately when to get them, they were much better targeting this time around. And you mentioned Boston College, getting two really good scorers in Money Williams and Ernest Shelter from the mid-major ranks. And you got, Brandon Benjamin, who averaged a double-double at Fairfield. It does feel like there's a lot of potential with a team like Boston College. And he also mentioned Syracuse, with Jerry McNamara bringing in Gavin Godey, arguably the team's best player in Siena, with them. You're taking a couple of swings with the, Aiton Tobiasen, who averaged 17 a game, and then, Luke Wilson, who was a defensive player of the year at App State. You're seeing a lot of these teams, get more depth. It absolutely must if you're going to be able to survive league play. But, ultimately it is going to come down to coaching. And it'll be interesting to see these new hires in the league and whether or not they can take the same kind of big jump that Jai Lucas at Miami and Ryan Odom at Virginia did, finishing in the top three. I don't think we'll expect that from these teams, but, it is possible to have a very good first year in the ACC.
Yep, it certainly is. And I do feel like it was a little bit jumbled up at the bottom. So some of these teams that they decide to go for it, I think that it could yield some big time dividends right away. As we're being joined right now by Tristan Freeman, does such great work over at Boston Brackets, joining me on Coast to Coast Hoops. And certainly it's been interesting to see what we've gotten here in the offseason. And while those bottom ACC teams have signed quite a few guys, there have been some notable schools that have really been holding off. Like Kentucky, they picked up Alex Wilkins and Zoom Diallo. I thought they would do a little bit more. LSU's roster right now is Mohamed Diabate, and that's about it. What have you made out of some of these teams that have not signed a lot of guys? And do you think that there's a potential that they're waiting for eligibility in terms of these like 5-5 waivers and things like that coming through? Because I know that there's a lot of guys that entered in the transfer portal that currently don't have eligibility that they might in the coming days and coming months.
Yeah, but even in those cases, most of those guys would normally be gets for Kentucky. I just think Kentucky is just striking out on all their main targets, and they're struggling to find backup plans because, they pretty much missed out on all the front court pieces, with the latest being Donnie Freeman. And then, Will Wade's had a completely empty roster. And even if you are waiting for, possible 5-year guys, you still can get other pieces. And the fact that, one, he hasn't been able to get anyone from NC State to follow him, and two, just the lack of overall recruitments that LSU has been involved in. I mean that's a warning sign because the SEC is still going to be very good next year, and there's probably going to be 4 or 5 teams in the top 15. So if you can't even field a roster, and there's still time, but not too much because the top portal guys are picking teams, then if you're LSU, you're going to be in danger of having a really rough first year.
Yeah, I mean, I have been stunned that they've only got Mohamed Diabate and nobody else on the roster. Good first piece, but you need more than one guy on the roster. Right now, they'd be ineligible to play in any college basketball games because they don't have 5 guys to be able to suit up. So that's been interesting to look at, to say the least. And while these teams have been striking out a little bit, I'm not sure how you've taken a look at the offseason, but I truly think one of the big winners here has been the Big East. You know as well as I do, Marquette, they just decided not to use the transfer portal over the last 5 or so years. I feel like they've done a great job of revamping that roster. I love the moves that Providence is making. I recognize that UConn got the bad news of solo ball, but outside of that, they've been making some nice moves. How do you take a look at the Big East? Because I feel like them having a basketball-centric focus has helped them out right now, and I think that we've seen these teams, Seton Hall throw them in here as well, making some really nice moves here in the offseason.
Yeah, I think, considering how rough it was collectively for the Big East, there certainly was pressure on them to succeed. And, team like Xavier filled up its roster early. Villanova has been slowly adding pieces. Creighton has done a good job as well with their new coach. I think ultimately, Seton Hall and Georgetown sort of stand out as teams who just haven't been able to get much. And then you can also include Butler, who I think everyone knows doesn't have the most amount of resources to work with, and are sort of taking a lot of swings. I think right now those three sort of stand out as the bottom. But you mentioned the solo ball injury. I mean, they still have, Silas Demery to run the offense, but that's a key loss because that was a double-digit scorer for them. And we'll see if they can get someone in the portal to replace them. But with that injury, even with the moves they have made, it does feel like the top of the Big East can sort of be up for grabs. And maybe Marquette, able to keep Nigel James and, add in pieces they have in Sonata Frew and Noah Minisale, that should get them back in the tournament range, but could it get them back into the top 3 where they normally are in the Big East?
Yep, that is going to be a big question. And you mentioned it with Georgetown, they need to get on the board a little bit more, but overall, I've been liking a lot of the pieces that they've been able to sign as well. And how much do you think that there just have been a lot of bottom feeder teams over this offseason that have decided to shape up? Because we talked about with the bottom teams in the ACC, just mentioned it with some of the teams that struggled in the Big East. And I mean, among the winners that I've been looking at here in the offseason as well, how about some of those teams in the Big 12 with Arizona State making a great hire? I feel like Casey Alexander will get Kansas State in the right direction. And I've just been blown away by how good things have been for Cincinnati this offseason too.
Yeah, I mean, Calhoun was probably one of the more notable coaching hires of the offseason. He's landed a lot of pieces. Wasn't able to get a guy like Mason Valsev to fall from Utah State. But other than that, he's gotten plenty double-digit scores. I do think overall it's been an average offseason for the Big 12. I mean, Houston got Deaton Thomas, to run the offense. They're fine. Iowa State landed a whole bunch of early pieces. But, Texas Tech lost a lot of players. Obviously, Utah lost a lot of players. I mean, BYU, they get back Rob Wright, but it's been quiet for them. Baylor loses Tunde Yesufu to either the draft or portal. And then, the pickups for Kansas State haven't been very overwhelming with Casey Alexander. We'll see if his coaching ability can sort of get them to competitiveness. But I think overall, I don't see many true contenders at this point for the Big 12. We're obviously waiting on Tyron Stokes at Kansas, the likely destination. But even they still have to fill out their roster and add more pieces.
Yep, they certainly do. And for the Big 12, the bottom teams have been able to shape up. And you mentioned it with some of the top teams. Kansas is another team that I've been a little bit, shall we say, befuddled that they haven't signed a little bit more. We're waiting on them as well as Tristan Freeman, who does such great work over at Boston Brackets, is joining me right here on Coast to Coast Hoops. And we've talked a lot about the good. I've talked about some of the pleasant surprises. When it comes to this offseason, though, there have been a team or two that we have yet to mention that you're just sort of waiting on them and what they're going to be able to do and are just a little bit confused that they haven't done more thus far.
Yeah, if you want to go back to the SEC, I think Arkansas is an intriguing team. Malik Thomas is in the draft, but his stock is nowhere near Darius Acuff, so I think there's a good chance he's coming back. They obviously have, Jordan Smith, the five-star guard, coming in, but the front court's still fairly thin. They lost the seniors in that group, and, they added Cooper Bowser from Furman, but they're going to need more. And the big market is dwindling as is, so I'm very curious on what pieces they're going to add in coming weeks, because while they may have the guards to compete, they're going to need a front court. And currently that's lacking. And, obviously Cal is one of the top recruiters in the game, and the Razorbacks certainly isn't broke, but they're going to have to play in a couple more pieces for me to view them as a top 15 plus team, again, assuming Malik Thomas is back.
Yep, I'm in agreement with you there. I'm interested to see what Arkansas is going to be doing. So remember a few off seasons ago when John Calipari was talking to the Arkansas team and there was no team there. Feels like it's not quite down that far right now, but certainly they can use some guys, and we always can use great guests on this podcast. And Tristan, every single time we need that, you produce. You do such an amazing job over at Bustin' Brackets. You do such great work looking at this sport all 12 months out of the year. So love the good people at home know it's all on tap for you, and how people can follow along on social media and other platforms.
Yes, sir. You can all follow me at HoopsNut351 on Twitter/X. You can also follow my work at Bustin' Brackets, Hoops HQ, and every Friday morning for the Field 68 Daily.
Absolutely. And Tristan, he's doing such an incredible job looking at this great sport. Every single time he joins me, he lends such great insights. Did so once again today. So a big thanks to Tristan for joining me on Coast to Coast Hoops, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. Coming next, let's give you guys a roundup of the news and notes and transfer moves that we saw in college basketball over the last 24 hours. And we're back in lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Hoops Peters, and now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. It is always a pleasure to be joined by our good friend Tristan Freeman. He does such amazing work over at Bustin' Brackets, looking at this great game that we all know and love of college basketball. Every single time he joins me, he lends such great insights. Did so once again today. So a big thanks to Tristan for joining me in the last segment. Now it is that time of the podcast. I give you a recap of the news and notes that we saw in college basketball over the last 24 hours. You got some pop here with Oklahoma. Pop Isaacs, he has decided to commit with them last season over at Texas A&M. In SEC play, he was shooting in the high 30s from three-point range, about 9.5 points, 2.5 assists per game. Took him a little bit of time to be able to find his sea legs, looked much more comfortable towards the back half of the season. Oklahoma's going to need to add a little bit more size. They've got Kanani Ruths coming over from Louisville, Tyler Hendricks, nice 6'6" combo player from Utah Valley, but certainly they've done a nice job in terms of revamping that backcourt. They obviously lose Xavier Brown. They also lose Nigel Peck from a season ago, but they've done a good job in terms of adding guards. We all know what Porter Mosher is able to do with those guys, so I do like this ad for them. Again, hopefully they are not quite done yet, but I do think that that's a pretty solid pickup for them, and it's very clear that they're going to be looking to go very guard heavy for this upcoming season. Baylor's starting to get on the board with some moves. Isaac Salazar, he last season was playing over at Yale, and rock solid player, 13 points, 6.5 rebounds per game. He has decided that he is going to be heading on over with the Bears. For Baylor, they were not necessarily the world's greatest offensive team last year, but they were rock solid on offense, and for Yale, this was one of the more efficient mid-major offenses in all of college basketball. Salazar probably leaves a little bit of something to be desired on defense, and that's much of what Baylor has picked up. Caden Mingo was a part of a Penn State team that was pretty efficient on offense, very inefficient on defense. Brett Decker Jr., amazing three-point shooter over at Liberty, again, left us something to be desired on the defensive side of things. And Salazar at 6'6" was able to shoot about 40.5% from three-point range, so you've got that going for you. Baylor, it looks like they're going to be looking to outscore teams for this upcoming season. They're certainly having a type of guy in mind, so there's that aspect of things in terms of going all offense and no defense whatsoever. So we'll see if that's going to be able to pan out for Oregon. They've really hit the transfer portal hard here in the offseason. Taylor Bowen, he last season was over at Alabama, 6.5 points, a little bit over 4 rebounds per game. He commits with the program. Obviously, it's a little bit of a changeover for Oregon. I believe that Nate Biddle is officially out of eligibility. Obviously, they lose Jackson Shellstead in the offseason, but in a program that they really built themselves in the transfer portal about a decade or so ago. They've made some nice moves. Jasper Johnson is a former top 30 recruit coming over from Kentucky, and then you've got ancillary guys like Andrew Meadow was solid over at Boise State, but now he's stepping up a level. Tyron Riley last season over at San Francisco was a 10-point per game guy. Farrell Compton, he's not going to light the world on fire with his offense, but he's going to be help out a defense that just was below standard last season. So I do like the range of guys that they've got here in general. Bo Bowen is a guy that at 6'10" is also able to pop it and lock it from 3-point range as well. Some relatively good versatility there, and overall some solid moves made by Oregon here in the offseason. You got this piece of news for someone that's actually returning. Caleb Foster is going to be back at Duke. He's going to team up with John Blackwell in the backcourt. You saw Ben Skronowski come on over from Belmont as well, and you already saw Patrick Ngongba down low as well. So for Duke, they've got a nice recruiting class coming in. They've got a few starters from last year's team that are going to be back with the program as well. It's going to be a nice blend for this team, and I think that they're building it the right way. They've went into the transfer portal for a big-time add in John Blackwell, 19-point-per-game guy over at Wisconsin, but they're having some camaraderie with that program as well. I really think they've done it right here in the offseason. Let's see if that actually yields some fruit. Anton Bonke, he last season was over at Charlotte, 10.5 points, 8 boards, shot 34% from 3 at 7'2". He has decided that he is going to be adding on over to Michigan State. As you know, Michigan State is not necessarily the program that has 100 billion guys via the transfer portal, and this is the first time that they've gotten up on the board here in the offseason, but a rock solid add. Obviously, they lose Jeremy Fears here in the offseason. They're going to be having some mixing and shaking in general, but I think that this is a good starting spot for them. I think that he's going to be able to fit the system, give them a little bit of versatility. We'll see who all returns, and we'll see if they can add someone else, because if they had nobody else, then I think that they're going to be behind the 8 ball a little bit, but that's a good first move to be able to get them up on the board. No shock here, Darius Acuff declared for the NBA draft. He is as good as gone. We talked a little bit about Arkansas in the last segment with our good friend Tristan Freeman, so figured I would pass that along. And how about Cincinnati just continuing their great offseason? Tylen Riley, he last season was over at Tulsa, 15 points, 4 boards, 4.4 assists per contest, a nice 3-point shooter as he bombed it at about 39%. He has decided that he is going to be on to Cincinnati, and for Cincinnati, you have to love the fact that they picked up Jared Calhoun here in the offseason, so they're getting back to their Coach Bob Huggins roots. Additionally, he was able to bring with him a few ancillary guys from Utah State. He didn't bring with him any of the big guys, but a few of the guys that were like redshirting, like David Awazi, are going to be coming over. Elijah Perryman is coming over as well. And then it's sort of like mid-major all-stars at this point. Travion Kaysen from North Dakota State. Miles Colvin, obviously not a mid-major all-star. He comes over from Wake Forest, but Riley Allen Patch, 6'11", he's got some versatility. I think that Cincinnati right away is going to be a rock-solid team. Would like to see them maybe add 1 or 2 more power conference guys, but overall, I think that they're doing a nice job. I do think that Jared Calhoun is going to be able to instill a system right away and have some success in doing so. And then for Texas A&M, while they lost Pop Isaacs on Wednesday, they did pick up Jalen Reese. He last season was averaging about 6 points, 3.5 assists per contest over at LSU. Certainly not a guy that's going to go out there and light the world on fire in terms of just putting the ball in the basket, but a former top 100 recruit that's going to be able to dole out the ball. This is sort of a Texas A&M sort of guy. Texas A&M last year holds greater than some of its parts. You do pick up PJ Haggerty, and I wonder what sort of an ad that's going to be, because wherever Haggerty has gone, he's been sort of that, for lack of a better term, black hole where the ball goes to him and it doesn't necessarily come back out. Luka Wells, he comes over from Radford. He's probably not going to give you a ton, but Cade Phillips is going to be able to help out this team on defense as well. So I'm not sure how everything works with Haggerty, but I do like the fact that they pick up a facilitator. I think that this is a relatively solid ad for them, and then I think that this one is solid as well. Jalen Cox, he was Mr. Do-It-All over at Colgate this last year. 18 points, 5.2 boards, 5.5 assists, relatively solid 3-point shooter. He heads on over to USC. USC hasn't had quite as much, shall we say, quantity in terms of transfers. This is transfer number 3, but the quality has been there. KJ Lewis was a nice double-figure scorer over at Georgetown and Arizona. Eric Rebe, former top 50 recruit, rock solid 7-footer from UConn. Now you add in there a guy in Cox who's able to stuff the stat sheet, was at a little bit of a lower level, but I think that he should be able to fit in with this program really well. I feel like Eric Musselman is getting it right. They don't need to pick up necessarily 100 billion guys, because Rodney Rice is going to be with the team for this upcoming season. So far it's been a good offseason for them. Like these moves that they're making thus far. We'll see if they're going to be able to make any more, but I think that they're actually doing things right here in the offseason, because they're not necessarily going for the quantity of moves. They're going a little bit more for the quality. And then when it comes to this move, I think that this is a solid one. UMKC, aka Kansas City, they're adding in there Sebastian Hartman. They finally get up on the board, and for UMKC, they were just so miserable against the spread last season. And Hartman, he was limited just 7 games, so it was a small sample size from last year. In that small sample size, was averaging about 7 points, 5 boards, shot 43.5% from 3, career about 33% 3-point shooter at 6'5". UMKC has just lacked offense for the longest of time. He was a starter over at Eastern Washington 2 years ago. He was averaging about 9.5 points, 4 boards, shot about 36% from 3-point range. So a little bit of an interchangeable guy. Certainly they're going to need to add more from here, but that's a good first pickup for them. And then for Kent State, they've been a little bit silent here in the transfer portal. Latif Diop coming over as well from Chattanooga, and then Godslov Nwabe, who comes over from Eastern Michigan, were their main two ads to start out with. Now they pick up Cameron Williams. He was over at Portland this last season, and he was a solid player over at Portland. 10.5 points, 4.5 boards, at 6'8", was able to pop it from three a little bit, only shot 27% from three. For Kent State, they took a lot of steps back on defense this last season. I'm not going to lie to you. So they're going to need to be able to reinstill that, and picking up someone from Portland, probably not going to be necessarily what you're going to need to be able to get the job done there. That said, he is going to be able to give this team some nice stretchability. I think that his active hands, as I do think that he's going to be able to fit a system that when they've been in full form, they've been able to do a nice job in terms of generating turnovers. I think that he's going to be able to help out with that regard, and I do think that that is going to be very solid for this program. And then I think that this one is solid as well. Michael Aaron McNair, he last season was over at Boston U. He has decided that he is going to be going to Maryland, and they've had some nice pickups. Robert Jennings, a second coming over from Oklahoma State. Bishop Boswell from Tennessee. DJ Trinidad Wagner, he was over at Arkansas this last season. Now they get a guy who's just able to light it up from three-point range. For Aaron McNair, last season with Boston U, he was their main scorer with 17 points, 5 boards, shot 44% from three-point range. This is a Maryland team that it feels like is going to be very versatile, well-rounded, and I like this pickup for them. Idaho is at last on the board. Kasi Wynot. He was playing over at Washington State and is a native of the great state of Idaho. It was a very small sample size of 5 games, but he was averaging 4 points and shot 40% from three-point range. For his career, was only averaging about 2 points per contest over at Washington State, but 6'6", a little bit of a combo player that's able to pop it from three. For Idaho, this is a solid pickup, and they do have some nice pieces returning from the season ago. They do lose Jackson Rasmussen, so they're going to need to do a little bit more here in the portal, but I do like this for them. For Akron, I feel like they made some solid moves thus far. Obviously, they lose John Gross from a season ago, but now they're going to be adding in their Ty Pence, who last year, he spied for the team, 9.5 points, 4.5 boards, shot 36% from three at 6'6", and for Illinois State last season, they were a really good defensive team. For Akron, they've already added in their Max Burton from the MAC, who he was able to be a nice double-figure scorer at 6'10". For Western Michigan, Taj Savetsky, who was a double-figure scorer over at Incarnate Word. Colin White didn't see a lot of minutes over at Ohio State, and Xavier Wilson didn't see a ton of minutes over at Kansas State, but these are nice upside guys. I like what they've done here in the offseason, and I feel like they've been able to have themselves some relatively nice gets. For Arkansas, it's been a little bit slow going for them. Their main guy that they picked up was Cooper Belzer, but Jeremiah Wilkerson, 16 point per game score over at Georgia last season and was a mid 33-point shooter. I think that that's big for them. They're currently dealing with a few question marks in terms of the NBA draft. Obviously, Darius Acuff, he declared, but Malik Thomas, if they're able to get him back, they're going to be really looking at a bit of something. So they're waiting on that piece of news. But so far, I do think that they are putting themselves in relatively okay footing. I think that they're probably going to need to add a little bit more down low because they had themselves a rough time of it last season down low. But that said, I do think that there are some pickups to be had here, but backcourt is still looking relatively solid, about as solid as it gets when you lose someone like a Darius Acuff. And when it comes to Cal, they're adding in there another Georgia transfer, as they already brought in their Jake Wilson. Now they bring in their Jordan Ross. He was over with the team last season, and he was lost in the shadows, ironically enough, in terms of guys like Jeremiah Wilkerson and company, but 6.5 points, 2.5 assists, began his career over at St. Mary's, and when he was over at St. Mary's, wasn't like some sort of a go-to scorer or anything like that, but was a guy that would play good, solid defense for Cal. They were a team that last year was a little bit lackadaisical on the defensive side of things. Wasn't a team that generated a lot of turnovers. I think that he's going to be able to give them a little bit of boost on that front, so this is a nice pickup for them. And how about Wes Miller bringing over more guys from Cincinnati? You already got Jizzle James. Now, these two guys aren't necessarily the biggest guys, but Kashawn Tillery is going to be coming with them, along with Tyler McKinley. With McKinley, he's a guy that stands right around about 6'8". Wasn't necessarily just lighting the world on fire down low, but he's a former top 100 recruit as a freshman last year, was averaging a little bit over 2 rebounds per game. When you've got Bob Miller and company, it's hard to be able to get out there on the floor, but they get him in. And then with Tillery, he was a former top 100 recruit of the class of 2025, was going out about 2 assists per game. Again, he was lost in the shadow of Kirk Kriisa early on during the season, then more like Day Thomas and company towards the back half of the season, but is a guy that has some upside as a little bit more of a primary facilitator, but was able to shoot 33% from three-point range last season. And they add to that Dylan Grant as well. With Grant, he was one of the main guys for Rutgers this last season. Granted, it was a down Rutgers team, but 9.5 points per game at 6'7", popped it at about 30.5% from three, with Rutgers' relatively slow, controlled team. I think that Wes Miller is going to be trying to get back to where things were a few seasons ago with regards to this program, at the very least the program that he was running at Cincinnati, where they were playing a little bit more defense-oriented, a little bit more slow, felt like they got a little bit too fast for their own good last season over at Cincinnati, reeled ice at midseason, and they were able to be a much more respectable team after that point. So I think that he's going to try to instill that over at Cincinnati, and I think that it's going to lead to a pretty nice season for them. It's been a little bit of a silent offseason for Georgia State thus far, but now they pick up a pair of guys that, like, Jacob Meyer is going to be coming on over from UAB, and then you got David Thomas. For Georgia State, they did can Jonas Hayes in the offseason, so they're going through a little bit of a coaching change, but for Thomas, he's someone that has bounced all around, began his career over at Mercer, where he was a double-figure scorer. Last 2 years at DePaul and Richmond, averaged about 4 points per game. Is a career about 38%, three-point shooter, a guy that when he was at Mercer was zoning out about 2.5 assists per game, so he's got the ability to be able to handle at the point guard spot. And then with Jacob Meyer, he was a solid player when he was over at Coastal Carolina a few seasons ago, a guy that has just bounced around a little bit in general. Last year over at UAB, 12.5 points, shot about 31.5% from three-point range, and I think that he's going to be able to do a nice job with this program. Keep in mind, he's another guy that was over at DePaul 2 seasons ago. He was a part-time starter for them, was able to average about 9 points per game, more of his facilitating game when he was over at Coastal Carolina a few seasons ago, when he was averaging about 2.5 assists per game for them. And when it comes to Georgia State, I feel like they are starting to get it right with John Cremins, who was a longtime assistant. He's now going to get the role as a head coach, and I think that for Cremins, just being able to have that, shall we say, pedigree, being able to have worked for as many programs as he did, most notably with Vanderbilt this last season, I think that he's going to step in right away and be able to elevate this Georgia State program that clearly has some resources. They maybe weren't allocating them the absolute rightest of right ways, but I do think that just the overall ability for them to be able to go out there, get some guys like they've already done this offseason, it leads to things being on the up and up for them. Someone who left the Georgia State program in Joel Chappelle last season was one of their main rebounders. 7.5 points, 5.3 rebounds. At 6'8", actually shot 37.8% from three-point range. He commits to Indiana State. Good versatility for them. Indiana State, in the, shall we say, post-Josh Schertz era, really built around three-point shooting. They're a team that likes to go up-tempo. I think that this is a nice add for them. They need to cut down on the turnovers, and I'm not sure if McGuire Mitchell, who comes over from IU Indy, is going to be able to help out with that, but he should be able to give them a little bit more three-point shooting as well. This last year, 12 points per game, shot 35% from three for an IU Indy team that they were playing that just absolutely harebrained, insane style where they were looking to generate turnovers like their life depended on it, and they were very much gambling for those turnovers. So going to be interesting to see if he fits in with this Indiana State system. For the Sycamores, they actually did a really nice job in terms of guarding the three-point line last season. Very weak down low. They're going to need to add a little bit more of a big man because they don't have that, but both of these guys 6'5" or taller, so they're going to be able to have a little bit of versatility there, and I do think that they've been able to do some nice early moves here, but would like to see a little bit more, especially on the defensive side of things. Jake Bogreth, he began his career over at Iona last year at Gardner-Webb for a team that was not great to say the least. He was solid at 6'9", gave the team 10.5 points, 7.1 boards. He actually shot 40% from three, albeit small sample size of 15 threes, but he has decided that he's going to be heading on over to James Madison. James Madison is a pretty slow and controlled team that typically, when things are going well under Preston Spradlin, the defense is solid. They bring in Gage Lattimore from NC Central, who's able to generate turnovers. KJ Wyndham and Garrett Sandra are a pair of guys that come over from the power conference level, and Sandra should be able to give them something down low at about 6'10" or so. I do think that they've got themselves a nice little nucleus here. I do think that Spradlin is going to be able to have a little bit of a nice bounce back season. After last year, things were, shall we call it, a little bit less than savory for them, but I do think that Hogreth, a nice solid pickup here, a diamond in the rough from a team that, again, they just weren't great as a team, but I thought that he individually was pretty solid, and I think that this is going to be a good fit for them. I think that this is a nice pickup as well for McNeese. They've done a really good job here in the offseason. They picked up the likes of an Elijah Moore coming over from Utah. They've got Jalen Dean Vines, who's coming over from Vanderbilt. They keep Larry Johnson, and now they bring in Florida State's Alir Mulak, who last year he was only giving you about 2.2 rebounds per game as a true 7-footer. He just really didn't fit the Luke Locke system, but for McNeese, it was a really good defensive team last season. Don't know if he's going to be able to fit their ability to be able to generate turnovers, but it was a McNeese team team that was having a little bit of a tough time on the glass. They gave up a lot of second and third chances. This should be able to help them out in a big way there. So I think that that is a really good pickup for them. And I think that McNeese, once again, getting it right. Very clear that this team has money to spend, and it's very, very clear that they are not afraid to spend it, which you absolutely love to see that, especially from a major program. For Nevada, they pick up Cedric Lath. He last season was over at Houston, 6'10" big man. He was relatively highly recruited, but just didn't see playing time because he was lost in the shadow of guys like Joseph Tugler and company. He was a guy that went to Liberty of Nevada, so he is familiar with the state, and at 6'9", he should be able to give the team a little bit of thunder down low. He stands over 250 pounds, so this is not a guy that's really going to be going out there, give you versatility, popping it from three, but with Steve Alford, he's really slowed down his system over the last few seasons. I think that he's going to be able to do a good job in terms of fitting that, and we'll see if this is going to be a fit with Mr. Mike Malone as Maxim Logue. He was over at Florida Atlantic last season, averaged 5 points per game, and he has decided that he is going to be going to North Carolina. I can't think that he's going to be seeing good minutes for North Carolina. Like, if he is, you just let me know. This just feels like it's a little bit more of a depth piece, a way to be able to get a little bit more experience on the roster, and if that's the case, yay verily to them. That said, if they're having many expectations for them whatsoever, I will question why they gave Mike Malone that much money and then they decided to spend money on Maxim Logue. And then for Elijah Elliott, he last season was over at Ohio, had his season cut short due to injury, played in just 13 games where he was averaging 4 points, 3.5 rebounds per game. Previous year as a freshman, shot about 39% from three, albeit it was on a relatively small sample size, but he has decided that he's going to be heading on over to North Florida. We talked about this with our good friend Avetta Aberman last week. It is appearing that North Florida is content to spend a little bit more money. Was very surprised that they stuck with the interim coaching regime from a season ago, but they're looking to be able to put a bit of money into the program. They are a program that just in general, you go back to the Matthew Driscoll days, they're always loving to bomb it from three-point range. It looks like they're going to be doing a lot more of that this season, and I do think that he could be a good fit with the system. I love this one for Notre Dame. Braden Smith, he began his career over at Colgate. He redshirted a year this past year over at Gonzaga. He wasn't like some lightning rod scorer, but 5 points, 3.5 assists per game. He heads on over to Notre Dame. For Notre Dame, they pick up Logan Duncombe. He's going to take over that Carson Tout role in terms of doing the dirty work. Down low, Ethan Roberts was a nice go-to scorer over at Penn this last season. Notre Dame are finding guys to be able to fit the system. They either want guys that just absolutely go bombs away from three-point range or guys that are going to be able to clean up the glass. They've been able to do a nice job in terms of mixing and matching here in the portal thus far, and they haven't necessarily added like a whole bunch of different guys or anything like that, and they do lose the likes of Marcus Burton, Jalen Harrelson, but I think that they've done a good job in terms of rebuilding from that, and I love this one for them. Christian Brown, he last season was over at James Madison. He averaged 3 points and 4 rebounds per game, and he's decided to go to Ole Miss. Now, Ole Miss has made some nice moves. Roman Sapula coming over from Pittsburgh, 6'6" combo player. Adam Clark, he was Mr. Do-It-All over at Seton Hall, was really good at generating turnovers over at Merrimack. Andy Okafor, I think that he can stretch the floor. If they're giving Christian Brown meaningful minutes, that's not a place where they necessarily want to be. If this is once again one of those walk-on situations, be a good locker room, brouhaha guy and everything like that, okay, that'll be able to work out for them. If they are thinking that this is going to be taking them to the promised land, I don't think that that's going to be very promising. Tim Oba, he last season was over at Buffalo. He has decided that he is going to be heading on over to Penn State. Penn State needs any sort of a post presence whatsoever. They were terrible on the glass. Oba probably not the answer. 8.5 points, 5 rebounds per game for a Buffalo team that they themselves left a lot to be desired defensively. Not a guy that is really going to go bombs away from three, but he is 6'11". He was able to average a block and a half per contest. And keep in mind, Yannick Conan Niederhauser, when he came on over from Northern Illinois many years ago and became a really nice impact guy for Penn State, it's not like he had the world's greatest numbers as well. So is there some upside here? Yes. Are they probably going to need to add a little bit more down low? I think absolutely, but at the very least, they are addressing things down low because, man, it was not great for them last season, and I do think that this is going to be able to help them out quite a bit. How about some help for our good friends over there at Rhode Island? Dylan Williamson, he was one of the main men over at Towson this last season. Obviously, a slow and control program. Rhode Island, they were playing very slowly this last year. 14.5 points, 3.5 assists, shot 34% from three, career 37% three-point shooter. He heads on over to Rhode Island. I think that this is actually a really nice pickup for them, and I think that he's going to be able to be an instant fit with this system. system. I think they identified a guy that could come in right away, be able to know sort of the, shall we say, fundamentals of what they're looking to do. He's going to be able to do so. Great pickup for them, so I love this one. And then T.O. Barrett, he is going to be staying in the SEC. Last season over at Missouri, had some flashes towards the back half of the season. At 6'4", he's a career 19.5% three-point shooter. He heads on over to Vanderbilt. Looking like Vanderbilt probably not going to be the same three-point shooting team that they were a season ago. They do pick up ace break glass in case of emergency from Washington State, Sebastian Williams-Adams. Barrett, he's more of a, shall we say, driver, I think is the best way of putting it. Vanderbilt, obviously, they lose so many guys from a season ago in that backcourt, so I do think they're going to see a different new-look team, but at the same time, we have seen in the past, going all the way back to his time over at Georgia Southern, along with James Madison, Mark Byington do a really good job with a whole bunch of different roles, and a lot of people think Mark Byington's style all about turnovers, great guard play, what have you, but he's been able to give different looks in different seasons. He's able to adapt to his guys. He certainly, I think, is going to need to do so this season, but I think that he's going to be able to do a solid job of doing so, so I think that he's got himself a little bit of a different roster for this upcoming season, but I do think that he's going to be able to find a way to make it work, and it appears as though they're going to be a little bit more, shall we say, content to be able to get to the basket, and they're going to be a little bit stronger down low this season than they were a season ago. For Tulane, they get on the board with transfer number 2. They added TJ Nudu about 24 to 48 hours ago. Nice three-point shooter that comes over from Detroit, average double figures last season. Now they bring in Christian Lewis. Was a part of a Louisiana Monroe team that wasn't great, but this guy was able to average 18.5 points, 4.5 boards, 3 assists at 6'3", shot about 31.5% from three-point range. Conference play was averaging 19.5 points per game for Tulane. When the team is at peak form, they're able to really go bombs away from 3, and they're looking to play up tempo, and Monroe was a team that pushed quite a bit of tempo. Now they're going to need more depth. I have been saying this for years. It is a Tulane team that has not had enough depth for what they're trying to do, but that said, if they can sign a few more guys, they now have 2 nice go-to scorers already on the roster from a lower level. I think that this can work out for them. Zion Stanford, things did not work out for him last year over at Villanova. He was averaging only about a 1.5 per contest. He decides that he's going to go back down to the lower level, and he's going to join Towson. I think that this is a great pickup for them. I think that he's going to be very rock solid in terms of his defense. When he was over at Temple 2 seasons ago, 13 points, 4.5 boards, pair of assists per contest, shot 35% from 3-point, so he's able to stuff the stat sheet at 6'5". He's able to guard multiple positions, so I think that this is a very good system fit for them. For Towson, obviously, they lose the likes of a Dylan Williamson and company, but this is a good starting spot in terms of being able to get back to where they want to be. And then for Tarleton State, they already picked up Caleb Blackwell, a guy that very much fits a system coming over from UTEP, and now they pick up Isaac Harrell, who was over at Elon this last season, and Frank Emu. Hopefully I got that correct. With Emu, he last season was playing over at Texas State, and it's a Texas State program that they themselves were one of the best in terms of generating turnovers last year, just like Tarleton always does now, moving away from Billy Gillespie, but it appears as though they're going to stay true to their roots. And for Emu, he was a primary, shall we say, sixth man for Texas State this last year. He was able to give the team 7 points and shot 42% from 3 at 6'5", and he was an All-America East rookie player over at UMBC a few seasons ago as well. I like that move. And then Isaac Harrell, he over at Elon, was able to shoot about 36% from 3, 7.5 points per game. Not necessarily a guy that fits on the defensive side of things, but they do upgrade their 3-point shooting at Tarleton. They've had a tough time with regards to being able to develop good, clean offense over the last few seasons. This should be able to help them do so a little bit better. So I do think that these moves are going to be able to really be able to give this team a little bit of a fresh start, for lack of a better term, for Stetson. They already retained Colin Cool, one of their top scorers from a season ago, and now they pick up Magnus Entman. He last season was playing over at Kent State. Didn't see a lot of playing time at 6'9", 3 points, 2.5 rebounds per game. It's very clear that Stetson needs to be a little bit better on the defensive side of things. They've been one of the worst teams in all of college basketball there, and they were really just getting plowed on the glass last season. He's going to be able to add a little bit of size. Certainly is going to be a project player, as he just didn't see a lot of minutes over the last few seasons, but still a guy that is going to be able to give them a bigger body, and I do think that that's something that has the potential to be able to work out for South Dakota. They pick up Josh Townley Thomas. He was over at Creighton this last season, and he's someone that really didn't see a lot of minutes in general for the team, but I feel like he could be a little bit of a nice upside piece at 6'10". They are looking to be able to be a little bit better down low. They were able to do a nice job with Cameron Fens last season. They had him along KJ Thomas, who comes over from UTEP. Cade Kyerman, he was over at Iowa State last season. Really didn't see any minutes whatsoever when he was over at Iowa State, but hey, he was at Iowa State last season. I do think that they've done a nice job in terms of adding some small small pieces that could be able to make a little bit of a difference for them. So I do think that they're off to a nice start here. They were able to retain a few guys from the season as well. So all in all, relatively good start for them. And then Rice, we give our to Lane Kiffin go Owls. They had a pair of guys, Sean Blake, who was over at Vermont, and then Jarne Aluna Inage. Hopefully I got that correct. And with our man whose last name is very hard to pronounce, comes over from Charlotte last year, 3.5 points, 3 boards, shot just 56.5% at the free throw line, but they're not going to be looking at him to necessarily be able to really elevate and pop it from 3. He's a guy that stands right around about 6'9", 6'10" for Rice. They had a very difficult time down low, and they had some relatively good guard play. He should be able to hop out there. And then for Sean Blake, he was averaging 4 assists, 4 boards, 7 points per game for a Vermont team that was one of the best in terms of not allowing second and third chances in all of college basketball. Was a little bit of a weak 3-point shooting defense, but he should be able to hop out a Rice team that was hit or miss from the outside as well. He was shooting about 35% from 3-point range, plays at a slow and controlled style, and with these two ads being guys that played in very slow systems, it appears as though Rice might be looking to tone down that tempo a little bit. So we'll see what they're doing moving forward, and we're going to be continuing to check in on all these offseason moves and what these teams are doing in general. And if you do like hearing from this fine podcast, Coast to Coast Hoops, you're able to subscribe wherever your podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, Stitcher, and TuneIn. If you have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you for this podcast, you have one of two ways we offer those in. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at GUNET_81. Keep in mind, letters DM, they mean does not matter. So per usual, please do send these into the timeline. The other way is find an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it's very much appreciated. And then from there, you're able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review. A big thanks once again to Tristan Freeman of Boston Brackets for joining me in the last segment. And I'm coming at you guys every single day on this podcast, regular season and off season. And once we get back in season picks and analysis on every single game, every single day. So I'll come at you once again tomorrow as well. Thank you.